I would like to lead towards your experience with spirituality. But before that, just a technical questions. When did the... Yeah, it's better to have it close here. It picks up my voice easily.
Okay, good.
So, when did the Beatles go to India? When was that? Do you remember?
Oh my goodness gracious, that was, we sort of all grew up with the Beatles. I mean, it started with this amazing, as they called it, the English invasion. They took all of our rock and roll, they took all of our blues. Led Zeppelin, for instance, the first 7 songs from their first 2 albums were all written by Willie Dixon, who's one of the greatest blues pens out of Chicago. They never paid him back. And there was a lawsuit that went on for 20 years. I think they found $20 million to the estate. I actually helped in the lawsuit, and Willie died the day after the suit was done. But we the Beatles. It was a phenomenon, and as I told you, I think the other day, they asked the PR agent for the Beatles, to you as a PR person, what was the Beatles? And he said it's the longest running story since World War II. And it was, and part of this journey we went from this transition and from them taking pop music and Americanizing it, starting with really early R&B songs, and then moving into their own amazing talent, and then suddenly the revolution starts, the peace and love, and they grow their hair out, and then they start taking drugs, and then they this trip to India, which probably millions and millions of people followed this trip because it made such an impression on them. They went to the Maharishi, and it was basically, they went twice. The Beatle wives, the 4 boys and their wives went the first time. They met the Maharishi, who was, as you know, recently died, but was a fascinating guy and had this TM thing that he was doing, and had
transcendental meditation.
Yes, transcendental meditation, which is very controversial for those of us in the spiritual game. It's very dangerous. It's not for everybody. But they were highly effective. Everybody knows that George Harrison was suddenly the sitar entered into the Beatle music and the spirituality. He really carried the spirituality of the group. John was the tough, street-talking guy, working class hero is something to be. I don't know if you know that song. And Paul was the pretty boy with the very great lyrical, lovely love songs and so forth. So it was, gosh, I really don't know what year it was, but it had to be late 60s. That they went there.
But they were there before you made a voyage to India?
Yes, long before, because my voyage to India didn't actually occur until 1974. That's when the first time I came to India.
And what took you to India? Why? I mean, you have been all around, and you had some wild experiences in Jamaica before anyone went for the Rastafarians.
Well, I was well schooled on being fearless, I'll say that. Well, it was, I think that everybody who has this existence that we call life have to define different aspects of it at one time or another. And one of them is their moral being, and another is their spirituality. You have all these religions, which are really, organized political parties to a certain degree. And then you have spirituality. So you have to define, do you believe that there's a higher power? Do you believe, or you just swept along because of your parents and they put you into a situation? Is this what your community was doing? Was it part of your life? In my little town of Jackson, Tennessee, to this very date, and it's a little town between Nashville and Memphis, we hold the record for more churches per capita than any other town in America. So you've heard of the Bible Belt.
Do you have a figure?
You just every street corner. I mean, every single street corner. And you've heard of the Bible Belt. Well, I lived underneath the buckle of the Bible Belt, and you were in church 4 or 5 days a week. I happened to come from a long line of Scottish ministers who came over in the very early days of America, and my grandfather was a minister in Halls, Tennessee, and I was in church 4 or 5 days a week. I know that my mother was so excited because she actually kept it herself, and she was so proud. I had a 13-year attendance pen where I missed any 3 days a week at church, the weekend, the church camp, the church socials, the church everything. She forced me to go to all this. It was almost like, this is where you met your wife, this is where you met people you're going to do business with, because it was spread into 15 types of Baptist churches, 15 types of Methodist churches, 15 types of sort of right-wing offshoot churches. It's the blacks community as well, which is extremely spiritual, which, as you know, accepted Jesus Christ when they came to this country, had also a whole range of churches, the AME churches, the Calvary Baptist churches, and so forth and so on. So it was a major part of my upbringing, but it was more of a social event and a requirement than something that was pulling me spiritually. And I don't think anyone really, sometime in their life, and probably when you're starting to reach your mortality, you start thinking about, well, maybe I hope there's an afterlife or something else going on, but sometime you have to define it.
Now, India, how did it happen? What brought you to India?
Well, it's actually several different things. First of all, I had an experience where a brother of mine actually died in my arms when I was 13 years old. I went into sort of trauma shock for about a year. I became totally introverted. I couldn't sit in a room with more than 2 or 3 people. And things suddenly, not of my own making, started coming into my consciousness. And I thought that I was crazy. I was very frightened. It terrified me because it was something outside my own mental workings. And it would be, I'd see somebody and I'd say that person is sick, or I'd walk into a room and there would be a vibration that would be coming at me that was evil or restless or something else. And that's why, one of the reasons why I couldn't be around a lot of people. Now, my parents sent me to therapists and they said he's not psychotic, it must be a neurological problem of some sort. But it continued, and my father's dearest friend and our family friend, they went on the journeys of St. Paul together and spent a lot of time together, was a famous preacher, Norman Vincent Peale in New York, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, and actually had his guide magazine subscriptions were somewhere between Time and Newsweek for over 20 years, and he was a great soul and a great man. And I spent a summer up there with him and his wife in Pawling, New York, and he sort of put me on the path, as you say. It wasn't the spiritual aspect of a God or a Jesus or Allah or this or that or religious thing. It was this super awareness that was outside my consciousness. And he basically told me, he said, look, Tigrett, Isaac, he called me, he said, this has happened to me many times, this is why I'm in this game. He said, but if this is going to continue happening to you, you're going to have to spend the rest of your life, or at least the time while this is occurring, defining your spiritual life, because you're in contact with other dimensions and other aspects which people normally are not. And he said, it's happened to me since, and this is why I got into this. He said, please don't tell anybody, and I'm surprised that I'm here telling you about it, because frankly, it's like a fairy tale. Unless you've had these experiences yourself, there's no way anyone can conceive that it's possible. So he gave me lots of books on metaphysics and some other spiritualists to read and so forth and so on. And that sort of started me on my journey to India as I...
It's a direct sort of stumbling block, a moment where you became convinced this is the trip I have to take now.
No doubt about it, because I was terrified before, and I thought there was something wrong with me. And then here was this great man that I admired myself, because he was a close friend of the family, who was giving me absolute direction and be frightened. And this is not unusual. This has happened throughout history and been written about and thought about. And You know, and oddly enough, metaphysics, as they call it, which I think is an overuse and under maybe mysticism is better to say, but it's been the basis of practically every religion that's ever been on the planet. There was a mysticism in Christianity, which of course the Catholic Church grabbed and hid somewhere in the Vatican and has been lost, but all of them. But India is the home of it all, to me, in my mind, and the Beatles represented that. As I told you, I went through a series of wonderful events that gave me the possibility of opening something, the Hard Rock Cafe, when I was 22 years old. And this is the first time I could actually be with a large group of people and feel comfortable, because suddenly I was the man they were coming to, all these kids, wonderful kids that were working for me. And suddenly these broadcasts, if we put them that way, came to me whenever I came up against a problem, because I was untrained, uneducated. I had a 10th grade education, barely.
And in excess of alcohol, excess of drugs.
Yes, absolutely.
Sleepless nights.
Absolutely.
Totally reckless behavior with your life.
Yes, and I'm glad that you remember that from our talks of the last day or two. And, you know, I had a very troubled life with lots of parental problems and deaths in the family and destruction and violence and insanity and so forth, just like many other people. It's part of what many people grow up with. But it had affected me in a way in which now I joined the revolution, and I became a revolutionary, and the drugs and the alcohol and everything else was part of it. It was also dulling some of the pain that I had. And then on the other side, there was this other me, this other super consciousness, if you will, or some other consciousness, or something else calling me that wasn't really part of my physical being, and didn't seem to be part of my mental being, which was broadcasting. And it kept, you know, when I run up against a problem, an answer would come, and it was very simplistic. I didn't realize what they were until I got to India and did more studies of the Vedas and the Upanishads. But basically, it was these what they call the 5 human values, which are peace, love, dharma, righteousness, truth, Sathya, and ahimsa, nonviolence. So as I'm running the Hard Rock Cafe and I come up against a problem and I had no idea how to deal with it, suddenly it would come, is this a peaceful situation? Are you creating a place that is, people want to come to work and it's wonderful and joyous and there's mutual respect, or are they just coming here to get a check? And all of a sudden there'd be an opportunity to go off into a negative direction, and it could be very valuable monetarily, it could be very valuable personally for some reason or another. And then this word dharma, or righteousness, is this the correct way? Is this the correct path? And it would be so overpowering that I was sort of frightened not to follow it. And then when I did follow it, everything turned out great. And it's like I was on autopilot, and all of the weaknesses I had, but when it came to my destiny and the movement through time, these things guided me. And of course, immediately, as Dr. Peel told me, I had to find out, where is this coming from? Where could this possibly be? Why am I having this? Why is something paying so much attention to me? And what part it is me and me? And so oddly enough, I picked up Newsweek magazine, and I always read the book sections ferociously, as I do lots of periodicals. And I think this was, gosh, 1970, 71, and there was a book that Harper's and Row had come out with, and it was absolutely panned in Newsweek, saying this is a ridiculous book, it's absolutely absurd. And it was called The Secret Life of Plants by a guy named Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird. And it just said it was all about how they had discovered that plants could react to humans, and it had other phenomena, like the famous place at Findhorn, where through meditation they were growing these huge vegetables, and all this paranormal sort of stuff, and on the edge of scientists. A guy actually from the CIA is the first who wanted to put hook up a basic device that could monitor a plant, and he would yell at one plant and love the other one, and this one would disintegrate and the other one would bloom. And this I said, wow, this has something to do with what's happening to me. And the book was panned everywhere, New York Times, everything. I called up the authors who were in Virginia, and I talked to Mr. Bird, and he said, I said, Mr. Bird, my name's Tigrett, I'm a young man in London, and I want to buy the theatrical rights to your book because it has something to do with my life, and I don't know what it is, and it's just in my head, I have to buy these theatrical rights. And he said, have you read the reviews? He said, we tested this book and HarperCollins printed 200,000 copies in hardcover thinking that this would be because of plant lovers and everyone around the world probably believing more in their pets and their plants than other human beings. We thought it was going to be a bestseller, but it was panned and it's dead and it's over with, and we were about to commit suicide, me and Tompkins. And I said, well, sorry, it is my destiny. I must buy this book from you. And we did a deal and traded, in fact, telexes in those days, including fax machines. And I bought the rights to that dead book for $10,000 over a period of 2 days. 6 weeks later, it hit the New York Times bestseller list. It stayed in the top 10 for 57 weeks. It became one of the biggest selling books of all times. And a guy named Wallen Green, who was a famous writer who had written The Wild Bunch and done a whole bunch of other things, had done a documentary that I had seen where it was a scientific documentary story, and I thought, well, this is the type of guy that should do this, where it's a feature-length film, not a documentary with actors playing scientists and discovering, and I forgot what the name of the picture was, and I'd seen it totally by accident, but now I'm sure it was faded. And I called him up, and he had a friend named Michael Braun, and they wanted to produce and write and do the whole thing. I said, I want to go around to these places and see these things myself, and actually got to go to some of these wonderful places. And of course, this just inspired more and more that there's other dynamics going on. There are things that are unseen in nature and in man and whatever. And this was a major turning point in my life.
Okay, now did this film project ever materialize?
I realized very quickly, first of all, I became the most popular man in Hollywood for about 2 weeks because I had the rights to this hot book. And I realized that I really wasn't qualified, and this really wasn't my scene. And oddly enough, Stevie Wonder's brother called me, who was his manager, and said, we read the book to Stevie, and Stevie wants to do an album and do the film. And I thought, of course, Stevie was the best at that particular time, at the height of his career. So I actually sold the majority of the rights, I think I kept a couple of points, to Stevie Wonder. And he spent 5 years, believe it or not, doing an obscure Stevie Wonder album, which was the soundtrack to this, and it's like a symphonic, it's just unbelievable. It's so un-Stevie Wonder. I don't know if you can still get a copy of it, called The Secret Life of Plants. And he put up the money for the movie, or he had it arranged. The movie was made, and that was a long time ago.
Now, in practical terms, let's go into that was the setup. What brings you to India?
Well, when this, as Doc Peel said, as long as this is happening to you, you're going to have to define your spirituality. You'll have no choice. And here I was, a young man growing up and drugs and this great popularity of the Hard Rock Cafe, and still this was continuously a theme that would interrupt my normal human self. Excuse me, and I had to find out where this was coming from. And I'd read many, many books, and I can't remember which book it was, but it talked about this type of relationship happening between masters and their students. And I read a lot about Zen masters, I read a lot about gurus, I read a lot about realized beings, I read a lot of books that I didn't particularly understand about metaphysics and the theosophists, and the list goes on and on. And finally, it just became so overpowering, as if I was being called to find the answer. 2 years after I opened the Hard Rock Cafe, 3 years, 1971, June 14th, we opened it up. And finally, when it settled down and we'd gone through some financial problems and got everything and I could leave, I went on this quest, and I decided that this calling was coming from India. I came here, 24 years old. I backpacked all over India, through the Himalayas, through Rajasthan, through the Punjab, then into southern India. Wherever I heard that there was a master, a yogi, a sadhu, an ashram, and I came very close several different times. There was actually someone in the south of India called the Shiva Bala yogi that he could talk to you through telepathy. You could approach him, and the vibration was so powerful that it was disturbing, actually. And he would speak with you and talk with you without opening his mouth or his eyes. He was in meditation. I came across one of the great masters of India who died in 1865, and of course, when these masters die, they believe that it's just the body that dies, and that the power, especially of a realized being or a being who has merged with his true personality, which is supposed to be divinity, we're all actually walking temples. And his name was Ramakrishna, who had written many, many books and died in 1865. And I had some very powerful experiences at his ashram, and experiences that overwhelmed me. But it just kept the fire burning. But this wasn't it either. I traveled and looked and was here and there and everywhere for about 8 months. And they kept calling me in London and said, "You've got to come back, we need you, we need your help, we're lost without you." And they were my family, and I had to choose whether to go back or stay, and I decided I would leave. And I had heard of one yogi down in a place called Aurangabad in India, and I went to Aurangabad to find this guy, and in fact I couldn't find him. And I had a flight that afternoon to Delhi to go back to London, and I was having breakfast, and one of the things that kept repeating for years was, it was just like a whisper, "I'm waiting for you, I'm waiting for you, I'm waiting for you." That was one of the things that drove me to realize that whatever this broadcast was coming from, it was coming from a place, a person, an entity, a dimension, something, which I was on this search for. So I was having breakfast in this hotel, getting ready to go to the airport to get on the plane to go to Delhi, and all of a sudden this, in a very loud voice, says, "I'm waiting for you, I'm waiting for you." And it was startled me. I was having, in fact, bacon and eggs at the time. I'm not a very good vegetarian, although I try to be. And I looked up, and there was a picture of this 40-some-odd-year-old, strange-looking Indian man with an afro this big. And I just stared at the picture, and I could tell immediately that the picture was sending this message to me. So I immediately ran to the desk, the reception desk, and I said, "Who in the world is that?" And they said, "Well, this is a very obscure guru, unknown at the time in India. He's in Bangalore," which was a couple hours plane ride away. And the owner of this hotel, this is his guru, which is a very traditional thing in India for everyone to have a guru and so forth, which means preacher, really, in southern terms. And I said, "He's in Bangalore," and I changed my ticket and I flew to Bangalore. I was in those days about 70 pounds ago, and I always wore black, and I had my hair down to here, and I wore all these religious symbols around my chest, and always in black clothes with my Ray-Bans on, aviators in those days. And I came here and I said, "Where's this Sai Baba guy?" And a taxi cab driver said, I know where he is." And I got in the taxi and I went out. It was a Sunday to where he just opened a university. It wasn't his ashram, but it was a university where he had residents. And this was a Sunday, which is a big day apparently to go see your guru, and I walked into this university and there was a big open field sort of thing, and there was a tree in the middle, and there were about 200 people, men and women, Indians, all, women on one side of the tree and men on the other, and they're all standing there. I think I just had my second pipe of opium just on the way out in the car, as a matter of fact. And I didn't really go in and join the group. There was an entrance, I just leaned up against the entrance on the inside. And suddenly this creature came floating out of his residence down a little drive. And I was mesmerized simply because of his appearance. And there's a, as you even mentioned yesterday, there was this air of total serenity that was radiating from him, which was something new. And I'll be damned, he walked right past the group that had been waiting for hours to see him, and he came right over to me, and he said, "You've come at last. I've been waiting for you." And I just fell back, and he said, "We are not new friends. We're old, old friends." He said, "We have much work to do together. You wait here." And he moved his hand, and this powder came out of his fingers, which I had no idea what it was, and I just looked at it, and he said, "Eat it." And I ate it, and he walked away, went back to this group of 200, and they were singing songs, and there was so forth and so on, and there were some students there. And I thought, this is the one. This has to be the one. I mean, it wasn't even maybe or if or whatever. This was the source. And of course, I had no understanding of any of this, but I'd been driven to India. I'd searched for this person. I'd been given this message, "I'm waiting for you." And here comes this master and says, "You've come at last. I've been waiting for you."
And his English not very good.
Not very good. Not very good.
Today,
but
really good,
it blew my mind completely. I left. I left that day. I took a flight up from Bangalore back up to Delhi, and I got on a flight and went back to England. And again, these values, which were, you know, peace and love and truth and so forth, in his ashram, there were all these signs about the 5 human values, but they were written in Sanskrit, and it was Sathya, which is truth, and Dharma, which is righteousness, and so forth and so forth. And I had seen a little sign on a piece of wood that was just sticking on a wall in this funny place, and it said, "Love all, serve all."
And you stole it.
I stole it. It was everything that I believed in. It's what I believe, that we're born to be happy and to serve others.